I was gonna record yesterday, but uh, I was gonna record yesterday, but I couldn't because I couldn't go outside because, well, I don't know if you can really see it, but yeah, you can't see it at all. Uh, Take my word for it. But it's super smoky outside. It's not fog. I wish it was fog, but it's smoke from all the fires and stuff. So I couldn't just sit outside and just do it. I had to wait until my car was available. So now I'm here. So, and like I'm trying to make a schedule for this, for all my videos, but it just keeps on not happening. So I'm my thing is just gonna be twice a week, hopefully. So whatever. Anyway, so jumping in because I know this video is probably gonna be a little bit long. So yes, this is Irreversible Damage, Chapter 2, which is titled or subtitled The Puzzle. And uh, this chapter focuses on the close examination of what makes this craze of transitioning in adolescent girls. So the puzzle involves the pushback from transactivists, the political divide between liberals and conservatives brought on by the transactivists, and what, according to parent reports, hooks these girls into this craze. Sorry, I'm like not having such a good time right now, but I really just wanted to get this over and done with. Abigail makes it abundantly clear that almost 100% of these people involved in this study are not anti-trans, Republican, and are far from bigots. They're just run-of-the-mill liberals and Democrats who not only support the LGBT rights, but are merely concerned for their child's mental well-being. I find that the biggest theme in this chapter is maladapting coping skills and blatant forced ignorance on these kids, including themselves. True underlying issues. Actually, it's purely the kids' underlying issues that people are ignoring. Actually, no, it's not just the kids, it's also the therapists and doctors and stuff. When Abigail mentions anorexia nervosa and compares it to the trans ideology, it really starts to click. Because she goes more in depth with it, obviously. This chapter is statistics heavy, so I'm gonna be gonna go over them really quickly. And I'm not really gonna dwell on them. The statistics reveal a truth that clearly wants to be denied, and in my opinion, the pushback only makes it more questionable as to the movement's motives. So, first one is between 2016 and 2017, the numbers of gender surgeries for natal females in the US quadrupled, with biological women suddenly counting for, as we have seen, 60% of all gender surgeries. In 2018, the UK reported a 4,400% rise over the previous decade in teenage girls seeking gender treatments. The next one, clinics in Sweden, Toronto, Amsterdam reported that their ratios of gender dysphoria had flipped from predominantly natal males prior to 2006 to predominantly natal females from 2006 to 2013. By 2018, academics in Europe were reporting a dramatic increase from the prior decade among adolescents presenting with gender dysphoria, mostly increased due to influx of birth-assigned females coming forward. In 2016, natal females accounted for 46% of all sex reassignment surgeries in the U.S. A year later, it was 70%, which, obviously that's a kind of a big jump. The point of these statistics here is to address how unusual the spike is in interest to transitioning and experiencing gender dysphoria. Clearly, interest was very low prior to this craze, and now numbers have skyrocketed, and it's interesting to point out that it kind of did start in 2006. And then it only got substantially worse, especially with, the iPhone coming out. Kind of makes sense, I suppose. Begs the question, like, why on earth are these kids that uncomfortable in their own bodies? Squirrel. Yeah, squirrels. How is it possible that all these kids simultaneously feel they were born in the wrong bodies and at such a later age? To me, it begs the questions, why is it, or how is it possible that this shocking number of kids were actually the wrong sex? To me, it makes zero sense at all. Why this many, and how is it any of this is natural? What's the purpose? What's the meaning, and why? Like, on a weird spiritual level of this uh, phenomenon, like, why is it so important? Why is it so prevalent? I really doubt that it's because they're finding their true selves. In any case, I'm going to keep on going. The statistics continue with Dr. Lisa Littman. Her study based on 256 parent reports. And I'm just going to go down this list. Over 80% of the adolescents were born females, with a mean age of 16.4, which I was also around that age as well when I was beginning to transition from female to male. Most were living at home with parents at the time of their transgender announcement, which I was as well, obviously, because I was 16. The vast majority had zero indications of childhood gender dysphoria. In addition to universally failing to meet the 6 criteria requirements for child onset gender dysphoria, which I think I'll just leave a link in one of these corners on my dissecting gender dysphoria to like that looks a little bit more into that, into the criteria itself. Almost a third of the adolescents did not seem at all gender dysphoric, according to parents prior to the adolescent's announcement of being trans. The majority had had one or more psychiatric diagnoses, and almost half were engaging in self-harm prior to the onset of gender dysphoria. 41% had expressed a non-heterosexual sexual orientation before identifying as transgender. Nearly half, 47.4%, had been formally assessed as academically gifted. Nearly 70% of the teenagers belonged to a peer group in which at least one friend had also come out as transgender. In some groups, the majority of the friends had done so. Over 65% of teens had increased their social media use and time spent online immediately prior to the announcement of transgender identity. Same. I totally relate. Among parents who knew their children's social status, over 60% said that the announcement brought the popularity boost, which I've also noticed. For myself, I didn't announce to anybody really. I actually I was like so stealth for myself that I didn't even get other trans people like on board with me. I didn't want to, I just wanted to be a guy and just live my life. I didn't care about popularity. It's just, I wanted to be this. And that was it. I made no deal out of it at all whatsoever. So I definitely differ from these kids. Even though I'm just a little bit older than them. Over 90% of the parents surveyed were white. Wonder what that is. Me! My parents are white. More than 70% of the parents had earned bachelor's or graduate degrees. Same with my mom, actually. Over 85% of parents reported supporting the rights of gay couples to marry. Over 88% of parents surveyed reported being supportive of transgender rights. Nearly 64% of parents have been called transphobic or bigoted by their children for these things, such as disagreeing with the child about the child's self-assessment of being transgender, which I I never called my parents any names. I just got really angry at them. But I mean, it's basically the same thing. If I had the buzzword, if I had transphobic and bigot, I would have spewed it at them. So I am technically part of those statistics as well. Recommending that the child take more time to figure out if the child's feeling of gender dysphoria persisted, calling their child by the wrong pronouns, wrong in quotations, telling their child that hormones or surgeries were unlikely to help, calling their child by his or her birth name, or recommending that the child work on other underlying mental health issues before undergoing medical transition, pretty much. Fewer than 13% of the parents believe that their adolescent's mental health had improved after transgender identification. 13 is a very low percentage. Obviously, it doesn't take a rocket science to tell you that. Over 47% reported that that mental health had worsened. 47% is almost half. And then with all these findings, Littman pretty much noticed two kind of themes going on. The clear majority, 65% of the adolescent girls who had discovered transgender identity in adolescence out of the blue, had done so after a period of prolonged social media immersion, which was definitely me, as I said. And the second one, is the prevalence of transgender identification within some of the girls' friends group was more than 70 times the expected rate, which I can't relate. I had no friends like this, so with all that stuff, oh boy. The pushback for this was from transactivists mostly, waffling on Twitter, and not peers, but not really colleagues, I guess. I don't know. Other people who were part of the Brown University, which Littman was a part of, um, and other major psychological power sites like Psychology Today, criticized, more like just spewed out random hate, calling Littman a bigot, anti-trans, conservative, overtly ideologically biased, dangerous, despite zero evidence to back up their claims. And when I was reading this, the word defamatory came into mind, also because they were like, we're going to get you out of your job that's completely irrelevant to what your study was. And I don't know if she's taken legal action for that, but I think she might be within her rights to actually do something legal about that. But I don't know legal stuff. I'm not a lawyer. I would say it's really defamatory because there's a clear, reckless disregard for the truth in here. I'm pretty sure they didn't even read it, or if they did read it, they were not listening. They just saw some keywords and then flew off the handle. So, yeah, so Abigail dwells on the pushback and the defense of Littman, which shows greater cultural context of what's happening. Basically, it's just cancel culture being cancel culture. She dwells on it for a pretty good chunk, and I do feel sorry for Littman for going through all this. That sounds really horrible, and she lost her job. My heart bleeds. That should not have happened, just because some people disagreed with what she did. It's not really about disagreement. It's not actually dangerous to be intellectually curious about something, but I guess that's a crime now. In her study, Lemon was examining the etiology, I don't know, is that how you pronounce it, of gender dysphoria, and typically gender dysphoria is noticeable in children as early as ages 2 to 4. She coined the term rapid onset gender dysphoria to describe the sudden spike in deviance from that pre-existing diagnosis. Littman makes it very clear that rapid onset gender dysphoria differentiates itself from the preschool age children experiencing gender dysphoria to those kids of adolescent age, about 12. I've seen some kids as young as 12 suddenly identify as it, to 14. or even as far as, 16, obviously, suddenly experiencing the diagnosis without having had any sort of discomfort in their sex prior. She makes it very clear that transitioning can be an option. It's not necessarily like something to avoid or whatever. But for those experiencing the rapid onset gender dysphoria, these girls clearly were okay with being girls prior to this, discovery. Therefore, obviously, like something very suspicious is happening. And a big thing is all of it is self-diagnosed except for like the 2% where a therapist said, hey, you might have this. And that is so dangerous and such a problem. Abigail moves on to discuss the social aspects of this phenomenon, peer contagion. Yeah, it feels like breathing in sand. A peer contagion can be a large group of, in this case, kids obsessing over one thing together, and it can be as harmless as trading Pokemon cards to certain fashion trends to more dangerous things as, like anorexia and this current ideology. So, a craze, Abigail defines, is a technical term in sociology, not a pejorative. Oof, I'm sorry. I hope I'm gonna pronounce this name right. Lionel Penrose introduced the term craze, saying it's not necessarily harmful or unreasonable, but it can be when, quote, an abnormal amount of energy is discharged in one direction, and that, as a result, matters more vital to the welfare of the group may be neglected. And this sentence confused me, but I had to read it over like 20 times in order to figure out what it meant was the cause is more important than the individuals within or anything outside of the craze or fad. So, yeah. Hence why many of the trans community hate detransitioners, anyone who remotely disagrees with them, and why they exile anybody who, let's say, just agrees or like minorly agrees with, like, let's say, a TERF, a trans exclusionary radical feminist, Buck Angel, Blair White, J.K. Rowling, or Rowling as some people pronounce it, I don't know. When it comes to teenage girls and spreading the peer contagion, it's believed that girls tend to listen and suspend reality for the sake of validating and supporting their friends' feelings to attain closeness and community rather than questioning them, which would otherwise cause separation and hurt feelings. So, because of this, teenage girls are more likely to assume their friend's depression and become depressed themselves because that's what estrogen does. It is a sponge for emotion. Girls experience higher levels of natural empathy. Like everybody, unless you have antisocial personality disorder, have empathy, right? But girls more likely want to uh, connect in a very emotional, empathetic way. Whereas boys are more likely to question you. Girls don't as much. So relating this to me, I do remember my female friends readily accepting me coming out as trans, and they didn't even bother to question me at all. But then it might just be because I was in a pretty just generally liberal school, but a lot of my male friends didn't question me either. Although more frequently, they would bring up my quote unquote dead name, my birth name, or flub my pronouns, and I know that a lot of them, well, not a lot of them, there was like two, at least two that I knew of, maybe three, who were attracted to me as, straight men to a straight girl. And I remember one of them, I was kind of creeped out by it because I was not at all attracted to him at all whatsoever. I was pretty much fully self-assured in my goal. I didn't need anybody else. and also nobody else turned out to be, or not turned out to be, but found that they were also trans. The only people that I became friends with as trans was when I was uh, right at the latter half of it, so I was like 19, and I made friends with two people who considered themselves genderqueer, and the other one was agender, and they were actually the ones who made me rethink being trans. So yeah, so I can't relate to these findings really at all. Except, I can relate to some of them, but not all of them. And just because I don't relate doesn't mean like I can't. It's not like these are false, But upon discussing the demographic, I like this quote the most. The daughters make a similar announcement of coming out as trans about herself. Then, then, only then her mental health worsens. They didn't find their true selves and flourish, Dr. Littman recalled from the parents' report she read. The daughters became more angry, sullen, and hostile to their parents, which I did too. Again, the more they suffered dysphoria, the more they pulled away from the parents who might help, which I 100% on that front totally attest to this. I did the same exact thing, and my distrust grew toward my mom, basically pulling a tantrum because I wasn't being fully accepted at face value. I demanded an unreasonable demand. I policed my family's language and tried to change them and their perception of me, as opposed to simply accepting myself and accepting the fact that I cannot change other people nor their unconscious clocking as my birth sex or whatever they saw me as. What you're doing as a kid, going through this phase, quite frankly, you are so upset with yourself, you're so uncomfortable with yourself, therefore you have to change other people. And the reason why there's such a huge pushback and transphobia is because you are trying to force other people to do something that they don't naturally see things as, Like, you claim that you're the opposite sex, but they just don't see you as that, and then you try to force them to do something that just doesn't come naturally to them. You're forcing them to take an action that they don't need to, like, really, like, show. This is gonna sound harsh, but they don't need to respect you, and you're trying to force that onto them. So that's one of the main issues here. Oh, there's really no way to like jump into this next point, so I'm just gonna say it. Well, part of this craze is contagious is the belief that non-specific symptoms should be perceived as gender dysphoria and that their presence is proof of being transgender. Yeah, I went through that too, because you're bending the rules of the criteria itself so it can fit into your mind. That's what they're doing. That's what I did. The belief that the only path to happiness is transition, which isn't necessarily within their community and stuff. It's also perpetuated by major medical and psychological websites who suggest transition as treatment. They don't list any alternative at all. It's always transition. And I saw a lot of these websites, and I was really disappointed to see that none of them were saying, why don't we look at underlining things? You can't say underlining things because that's transphobic. I think it's like John Hopkins University made a study, I think. Someone made a study that shows that many people who undergo surgeries are only just, they're satisfied with the operation. Like, it went well. I mean, you didn't butcher me completely, It's like I can still feel things and whatnot, but their overall psychosocial adjustments are no better than those who didn't have the surgery. That makes me think the influencers on YouTube who have the surgeries and they're super duper excited about it, and they continue to be excited about it for years. And so it makes me think, like, just because you see that they're having a good whole time, you know, all that in a bag of chips, like, doesn't mean that you will be happy. When you have these surgeries, like especially while you're recovering from them, it's like, you know, you're in a lot of pain, you're like on all these drugs, like, and that's really scary, and you cannot reverse the things that you have done. So yeah, I made a little joke here. You can't go back to a previous save state. It's not a video game. Life is not a video game. You have to be really careful with your decisions. Anyway, moving on. The belief that anyone who disagrees with the self-assessment of being transgender or opposes the plan for transition is transphobic, abusive, and should be cut off. Toxic is a common word used. Misgendering and wrong pronoun use is violence is another claim that they spew out. The anger within this community, and especially certain parts of it, feed off of being angry. They're addicted to the chemicals and hormones racing in their brains that cause adrenaline and cortisol cocktails. And I'm not going to delve into that. I would recommend watching. I'm going to butcher her name. It sounds kind of, I don't know, Russian maybe. I don't know. Karlin Borisenko video for a better understanding of what that means, what that addiction means. And I'll have that video in the description below. She talks more about social justice warriors and stuff, but the point is, like, it can apply to people who just keep on continuously and habitually getting into like abusive relationships, and what happens when your boss is really just really antagonistic toward you, and then they leave for vacation, and then you feel a little bit better, and then you start getting irritable. But she explains it really, really well. And I would also recommend, in terms of cancel culture, which is what I had mentioned earlier, Dr. Todd Grande. He makes a video on this, and he goes more into like just the psychological thing as opposed to the neuroscience type. And that'll also be in the description below, and I recommend that. Anyway, moving on. Abigail goes to, she compares the current craze, the transgender craze, to anorexia, which, you know, anorexia is still around, obviously, but she compares it to anorexia, and this is where it gets a little more interesting. She finds pro-eating disorder websites where the illusion is weight loss, positivity, and beauty. The advice within is harmful, deceiving parents into believing you've eaten, and deceiving your own body and mind into believing you've eaten and are full. And so the obvious parallel I can see right off the bat is secrecy and deception, like I said in chapter 1. Purchasing a binder or packer in discreet packaging so your parents are none the wiser. How to be stealth. You know, like, you know, I think I've described it before, but stealth is when you are trying to pass as the opposite sex, and everybody just spots you as the intended sex, and they are also none the wiser. Which is very, very sneaky, especially when these people go into the dating life and act as if they're not trans and they legitimately are the opposite sex. It's deceitful. It's secret, and it's kind of, in my opinion, a little abusive. But anyway, yeah, so this anorexic thing and the trans thing, it's the same exact thing, only dressed in different clothes. So Abigail points out that the similar virtues that anorexic and transgender people hold, trans with passing the best, and anorexics with being the thinnest. The ones who are the thinnest, the ones with the most illnesses related to their thinness, and their eating disorders are held up as the real deal. Likewise, the ones who pass the best, those who are the most ailed by gender dysphoria, are the real deal, which is the whole real trans versus fake trans, which I'm going to provide a link in the description below with another video that pertains to this exact subject of fake trans versus real trans. The ones who follow doctors' orders or aren't underweight are called outside anorexics, as if they're not good enough to be inside of hospitals. I don't know too much about that one. She didn't really elaborate. I tried to look it up myself, but I couldn't really find it. All I really found was people saying, "You need help." It's really hard to look up anorexic stuff. Anyway, so being a true anorexic or a true trans person is evaluated based on commitment by greater self-harm. So Abigail even points out that trans influencers who advise teens to lie about their gender dysphoria to their doctors. These people are called tucutes, which is a very deceiving name for those who do not believe in gatekeeping. They are the ones that will readily call anyone transphobic and a bigot for even questioning their authority on, their own identity and other people's identity. These people are, in my opinion, the most dangerous people. And they are very likely the ones who got Littman out of her job to begin with. So these two cute influencers tell these kids to claim they've always had it, they've always had gender dysphoria. And I think that's what I kind of did with my therapist now that I think about it. So, and to use to study the DSM-5 criteria, and then craft their stories, going on the basis that you need gender dysphoria to be trans according to medical staff. These influencers claim that, quote, "If you don't do this now, you never will. You're already at high risk for suicide," which, whoa, I hate this. How could you possibly say that to a kid? That is the most gaslighty thing I've ever fucking heard. How dare you? Oh, number one, you're telling these kids to fall into the victim mindset, which is a highly toxic state to be in. Number two, you're telling them to feel something they don't feel. And then number three, you're enforcing them toward impulsivity and rash behavior and thought, as opposed to calm, collected, thoughtful decision making, which you're telling them what to do and how to feel. You shouldn't be doing that. And then also, in addition to all that, not just being gaslighty, but you cannot use a statistic that you looked at with biased eyes. The the high rate of suicidality in trans people could be for reasons that the study didn't make clear, because they might have also been biased in agenda peddling. For all you know, the real reasons behind these suicidal thoughts could be because they're actually gender nonconforming teens who were bullied for being abnormal and or being gay or lesbian, but the statistic is counted as a trans issue. And they just completely disregard that. Yeah, that's pretty much the summary of that. And it is interesting with all the, with all the pushback and stuff. It really just, like, it really goes to show that, like, there's a very clear divide in politics here. And when it comes to the trans activists accusing other people of being conservative and bigots and stuff, mostly the conservative or the Republic thing, like, that's completely unfounded and extremely irrelevant because it doesn't matter. Like, being trans is not political, just like you don't have to be gay, or you don't have to be uh, liberal in order to be gay, and you can be trans and Republican. Like, there doesn't need to be a divide here. That's my stance on it. So that's why I think it's just logical fallacies and just uh, blatant discrimination and prejudice against a certain group of people. And that just goes to show, like, some more holes on the ideology itself. So, yeah, that's what I'm seeing in here. So, yeah, I'm gonna yeah, that's all I have. Well, anyway, I hope that was interesting and a little bit more insightful. I'm gonna get out of here. I do not like the smoky atmosphere. Goodbye.